So in the last class we had discussed in detail about this water walker robot, some of the key mechanisms which are involved in these water walker robots, about the locomotion involved in this water walker robots, some of the sub components which caters the robots, etc. we had discussed in detail. Now in today's lecture we will discuss about some of the key components which are there with reference to this water walker robot. So with reference to key components perspective point of view, so when we closely look into the structural design, so we have the body material in place, the leg design. So with reference to body materials, we have some of the materials which contributes towards the body materials are carbon fiber, the aluminum alloys, and the polymer composite. So these kind of body materials are kind of a lightweight materials which are being effectively used. Then with reference to leg design perspective point of view, there is a long, slender and a super hydrophobic material which is being coating, and then there is a PTFE graphene or a nano coating which is being participating it over here. In order to design to maximize the surface tension force and to distribute a weight evenly, it is mainly meant for preventing the sinking. So there are three pairs of legs are there, like water strider for propulsion, steering and balancing. So these three pair of legs are kind of water striders for, like, it caters the propulsion and the steering mechanism and the balancing mechanism. Now, when we look into the key components of these water walker robots with reference to actuation and control perspective point of view, we can classify these some of the components which includes the piezoelectric actuator, the shape memory alloys, the electromagnetic motors, and the soft robotic actuators. So as far as these piezoelectric actuators are concerned, we are well aware these are lightweight and energy efficient, and it provides a precise movement control. So with reference to shape memory alloy perspective point of view, it is used in some of the design for bio-inspired muscle-like leg motions. With reference to electromagnetic motor perspective point of view, so these are some kind of miniaturized motors which provide a high force output for fast locomotion. And a soft robotic actuator perspective point of view, these are pneumatically or hydraulically powered actuators for a kind of a bio-inspired flexibility based systems. Some of the key component of these water walker robot includes like kind of an energy source and a power management. So where we have when we closely observe the different energy source which are involved, so we have the solar cells in place, the micro batteries, and the wireless power transfer. So when we try to look into the solar cells, so these are some kind of lightweight and renewable energy for a long duration operations which can be embedded along with such kind of biomimicking robots. And then with reference to like battery perspective point of view, so as and when we try to focus on the compact power source, so it can be effectively used for different efficient energy management. And then we can also deploy a kind of a wireless power transfer. It's a kind of a potential for untethered and a continuous operation in the specific environment. So some of the key components of this water walker robots are like sensor and a navigation system. So as far as in the sensor and the navigation systems are concerned, we have a LiDAR or an ultrasonic sensor, optical flow sensor in place, inertial measurement unit, and a pH, temperature, and a water quality sensor. So in the case of LiDAR or an ultrasonic sensor, it's provide an environmental mapping and an obstacle avoidance. As far as optical flow sensor is concerned, it is used to detect surface water movement and obstacles for autonomous navigation. And inertial measurement units are concerned, it is used for tracking the acceleration, and it is used for balancing to adjust the movement in a real-time environment. Now, if we try to map with the reference to the application perspective point of view, these pH, temperature, and water quality sensor which is highly useful for kind of environmental monitoring applications. Now, when we try to look into the overall locomotion mechanism, so there is one mechanism which is deployed as kind of walking on water. So these robots replicate a kind of a water strider movement by exerting downward force on water while minimizing the leg penetration. Second, it has a small oscillatory leg motion which creates a propulsion within a minimal energy expenditure. When we look into the jumping and leaping perspective point of view, it is inspired by the natural water striders that can jump 5 to 10 times their body length without breaking the surface. and it uses a kind of a spring loaded mechanism or a SMA actuator to generate a kind of a high speed upward thrust motion, and it ensures a force which is applied gradually to avoid breaking the water surface tension. Now when we try to look into the steering and the turning locomotion, it has a differential leg motion. So it is similar to how water strider adjusts a leg force to sharp turns. It has a kind of a yaw control via asymmetric propulsion. The actuator pushes one side more than the other, and it has a fine control via a front leg which adjusted the leg angles, which is a guide of a guiding turning behavior. Now when we closely look into the application perspective point of view, so of these water strider robots, so when we try to look into the environmental monitoring, so it is meant for a kind of a water pollution detection, and it is equipped with a sensor for monitoring the pH and the temperature and the contamination. With reference to microplastic tracking is concerned, it helps to track the microplastic pollution levels in the oceans and the lakes. And a biodiversity and a research perspective point of view, it has a kind of a studying water strider movement, and it has an it can create a kind of an aquatic ecosystem. With reference to biological studies and robotic research studies, these are kind of a surface tension robots which provides an insight on how robots can leverage the liquid interface, and it has a biomimetic engineering which aids in developing a next generation of robot inspired by nature. Now when we try to look at it, also has a potential application in the case of a disaster response and rescue, that is a kind of a flood monitoring, so that can travel across the flood waters to assess the damage and find the surveyors. Oil spill cleanups, so these robots can carry an absorbent material to mitigate the oil spills. Autonomous life-saving systems, so it could assist in search and rescue by carrying floating devices. Military and surveillance, so there is a kind of a stealth resonance, the ability to walk silently on water, which makes it ideal for surveillance mission. And a remote water body monitoring, it can track the movement in lakes, rivers and coastal regions. As far as an underwater interface is concerned, it could serve as a kind of a relay for underwater drones. Now with reference to some of the challenges which are involved in designing these water walker robots are concerned, one of the key challenges is maintaining a stability and balance. So achieving an optimal weight distribution is crucial to avoid sinking. So of course, so in order to maintain the buoyancy, so appropriately material selection needs to be maintained. The design has to be appropriately maintained. The design has to be optimized for an efficient buoyancy, and then it also kind of a dynamic balancing, which requires a real-time feedback and the adjustment. And energy efficient and power constraint perspective point of view, there is a need for a lightweight power source which limits the battery capacity and the runtime. And it has a kind of a solar power solution which can mitigate some of these issues. As far as efficient actuation without breaking surface tension perspective point of view, generating a force without excessive water penetration is a key challenge. These soft robotic actuator or biomimetic mechanism can help to maintain the efficiency, and it can be used for scaling up a larger load. So while microscale robots work well, scaling up requires a stronger material and actuation method. And these water striders benefit from their small size and larger robots which face a greater water resistance. Now, so to give you an overview, so these are some of the mechanisms which are involved with respect to water strider, and some of the close key parameter mechanisms which are being explained with reference to the slab phase and with reference to the stroke phase. Now, let us discuss about some medical micro robot which are used for specifically for endoscopy related applications. So we will also discuss about the different mechanisms which are involved and how these mechanisms are deployed for different applications. Now we will discuss about this medical micro robots for endoscopy related applications. What are the different mechanisms which are involved with reference to design and development of these medical micro robots, in particular for endoscopic related applications? As far as like a biomedical perspective point of view, so even if we have gone through the entire modules, we are with reference to biomedical perspective point of view, we are more focused towards the targeted drug delivery as well as with reference to endoscopy. There is a need for micro robots to pitch in into this system. So in this regard, so let us see some of the mechanisms which are being deployed for this endoscopy related applications. So when we consider these medical micro robots are miniaturized robotic system which are designed to perform precise and minimally invasive procedures inside the human body. So these robots are particularly useful in endoscopy, targeted drug delivery, microsurgery and diagnostics related systems. So by leveraging the cutting edge technologies such as soft robotics, magnetic actuation, bio-inspired locomotion and autonomous navigation, medical micro robots are revolutionizing the healthcare by improving the patient outcome and reducing the procedural risk. Now, if we closely observe in this particular mechanism of developing these micro robots for endoscopic perspective point of view, two mechanisms are well established for locomotion for locomoting these micro robots for endoscopic related systems. So one is with respect to a kind of a peristaltic motion. In fact, we have discussed about this peristaltic motion in some of the modules earlier, and this is a kind of a open and close kind of actuation which happens. Now let us discuss in detail about the different types of actuation. So this is a kind of a shape memory alloy based robot. So basically it tries to mimic an earthworm related structure. So when we closely observe these earthworm, so these earthworm like similar to the gecko, it has a kind of a setae. So through the setae it will try to grip the structure and then a locomotion will be exhibited out of it. Now if you closely observe this particular movement of this earthworm, so this earthworm basically it's a kind of open and closed system. Okay, so what happens is like there will be a kind of a contraction and a expansion. So an alternative contraction and expansion will help a kind of a locomotion to move in an appropriate direction. So like in this, so if we need to biomimic this earthworm related structure, so appropriately we may need to design the structure in such a way that it's a kind of an hollow structure with two ends in it, and then we may need to mimic this contraction and expansion to get an appropriate locomotion. So like here we can discuss about the different state of these locomotions and how these locomotions are deployed for like movement of the system. So if you consider this overall construction of this system, this system comprises of two regions, and there is a kind of a shape memory alloy which is integrated into it. So initially it is in an initial state where the shape memory alloy is integrated. Then we have a kind of, in order to have an appropriate like fixture, or I should say that in order to have a appropriate support, so these setae will work on it, so that this setae will be helpful for giving an appropriate support to the structure, and then an appropriate movement can be depicted in this particular system. Now in this particular case, initially we have an initial state, then there is going to be a retraction state. So the retraction state is going to be a kind of an expansion. Then we have a kind of an elongation state. So in this elongation state, you have an elongated structure where these kind of setae will be fixed into the structure, and then we have a retraction. So we will be having an initial, so like this sequence will be followed throughout to generate such kind of locomotion. So we will be having an initial state, a retraction state, an elongation state, and the retraction state. So this overall mechanism we call it as a kind of called as peristaltic mechanism. So this peristaltic mechanism is a kind of an earthworm based mechanism, basically which is used for, like if we have a hollow structure or a kind of a delicate structure, so these systems can easily penetrate into the structures, and appropriate alternative contraction and expansion happens, and it can easily slide through the system for appropriate locomotions. Now we can see the next principle. So as far as in this principle is concerned, so it is something like kind of a these kind of systems are actuated using a piezoelectric based actuator. So as far as in this piezoelectric based actuator is concerned, so we will be having an elongation and then the retraction. So there will be an alternative movement of elongation and retraction. If we try to look into the overall construction of this system, so there will be a rigid structure and then there will be a flexible structure. From the rigid structure to the flexible structure, there is a limb kind of structures being attached to it. So initially this is on an initial phase. When the limb structure tries to elongate, then you have an expansion which happens, and then when there is a like a contraction, there will be a retraction which exists, and then again a retraction. So like there will be an alternative generation of an initial phase, elongation, then retraction, and then and again the retraction. So these kind of alternative approaches happen, which will be helpful for the movement of the structure. So like in this particular mechanism, so when we try to use this mechanism for endoscopy related applications, there are two sets of movements are like movements are experienced using these particular PZT based actuator. One is a kind of a forward movement. So in this forward movement, so we have a motion of the rigid structure, and in the reverse movement we have a motion in the reverse stroke. So by giving at a high frequency, appropriately you can have a control over the displacement, and this displacement can be efficiently used for endoscopic related applications. Now, as far as to summarize, so as far as these medical robots are concerned, so these are some of the classifications with reference to these medical robots. So as far as these types of medical micro robots are concerned, so it is used for different application. One is a kind of a capsule endoscopy based micro robots. So these kind of micro robots are small, swallowable robots equipped with cameras and sensors and actuators for gastrointestinal tract imaging. It replaces the traditional endoscopy, making non-invasive diagnostic possible. Like there are different examples which are there, like PillCam by Medtronic, which captures a high resolution image as it moves through the digestive system. So when we try to consider the magnetically controlled micro robots, these are powered and guided using externally using a magnetic field. It can navigate through blood vessels, intestines, and other narrow biological pathways. It is used for a targeted drug delivery. It is used for localized treatment and cleaning the blockage. So next, when we try to talk about the bio-inspired micro robots, these are inspired by bacteria, insects, or natural locomotion, example flagella based movement. So these mimic biological motion, uses cilia or helical tails or soft tissues adaptability. It is ideally used in vascular navigation. It is used in tumor targeting and intraocular operations. So these are some of the applications of this bio-inspired based micro robot. Now when we try to consider the soft micro robot, it is made of biocompatible soft materials for flexible movement inside the body. It adapts to a biological structure without causing any damage. It is suitable for delicate tissue navigation, and it is also used for some therapeutic procedures, and it is also widely used for some regenerative medicine related applications. Now, the other classification works on the principle of laser powered or light driven based micro robots. These are effectively used, and these are kind of non-contact based system which are being effectively deployed for different applications. Like here, in order to activate these micro robots, it uses a laser pulse or a light activation for propulsion. It can be remotely controlled with highly precision in surgical and diagnostics application. Some of the examples includes a light powered Janus particle for a localized drug transport are some of the examples related to this laser powered light driven. So this slide will summarize the overall types of the medical robots and how are they classified and what are the different modes of actuation which are being employed in the system. Now let us discuss about some of the key component and working mechanism. So as far as in this particular case study, so we are focusing more on the lasers, more on the micro robotic system for endoscopic related application. So in this concern, so we will be discussing about the locomotion and propulsion. So due to their small size, medical micro robots requires innovative movement techniques. So one is kind of a swarming motion. So as far as in this particular swarming motion is concerned, it uses a multiple micro robots to work together and mimicking bacterial colonies. So it moves as a swan and it tries to attack the particular target for a different functionality. Next, we have the flagella-like motion. So this flagella-like motion is inspired by the E. coli bacteria, which is using a kind of a rotating helical tail for swimming. This we have discussed in detail. Then we have a kind of a peristaltic crawling, which basically mimics how earthworm and intestine moves using expand and contract mechanisms. Okay, so where we have a kind of a peristaltic crawling which exhibits, we have a electromagnetic or a magnetic actuation. This moves in response to an external magnetic field, which enables a kind of a precise navigation. Next, when we try to talk about chemical or enzymatic propulsion, these kind of chemical or enzymatic propulsion uses chemical reactions, example hydrogen peroxide reactions, to generate movement inside the body fluid. Okay. So now when we try to look into the power source perspective point of view, these kind of medical micro robots require safe and compact power solutions. So like one of the aspect is with reference to this wireless power transfer. So the energy is transmitted remotely through inductive or electromagnetic coupling. Then as far as biodegradable batteries are concerned, it's a small biocompatible power source that degrade after their task is completed. As far as these fuel cells are concerned, it's a kind of a microbial fuel cells which generate power using a biological fluid. Now these are some of the images which basically talks about the targeted drug delivery and the drug. So in this particular case, the micro robots can deliver drugs directly to the cancerous tissues which are on the infected areas, reducing the side effects. And then there are certain amount of nanoparticle based robots which can be developed, which releases a drug when activated by an external signal. It helps in treating neurodegenerative diseases and tumors for a kind of a localized inspection. Now with reference to endoscopic and imaging diagnostic perspective point of view, this capsule endoscopy replaces the traditional and invasive endoscopic procedures. It helps to diagnose the gastrointestinal disorders, internal bleedings, ulcers and tumors. Some of the advanced versions include this robotic arm for biopsy collection is some of the examples which can be generated using these medical micro robots. Now, let us discuss about other sets of applications of these medical micro robots. One of the key application of these medical micro robots is the minimal invasive surgery. So as far as this minimal invasive surgery is concerned, like we might have heard about this keyhole based operations, etc., where there is a kind of a very less amount of interaction with the human body, so that appropriately it can be recovered. So these kind of minimal invasive surgeries, it enables a remote and ultra precise surgical interventions. It reduces the large number of inclusions, resulting in the faster recovery times. So some of the examples like micro robot for eye surgery and removing the blood clot are some of the key examples where a well-renowned technology has been established with reference to minimal invasive surgery. Next application is with reference to the vascular and neurological applications, where micro robot can navigate into the arteries and veins to remove the clot in the stroke patients. Like we have seen that when we try to use a kind of a ferrofluid kind of structure, so these ferrofluid kind of structure, they are getting magnetically actuated and they become a kind of a grinding wheel, and then they can be navigated through the arteries and it can be used for grinding the fat content. So these are some examples where such kind of selective micro robots can be used, selective localized attacking micro robots can be used for addressing some of the key challenges. Then use of deep brain simulations and spinal cord injury treatment is one of the application which is being focused with reference to this minimal invasive surgeries. Now, when we discuss about the cancer treatment, some micro robots are designed to directly inject chemotherapy drugs into tumors. So like we have seen a kind of, in fact, in this algae based micro robot which we had discussed in the earlier module. So we had a kind of a algae which is being surrounded by the targeted drug so that this can reach a particular portion and then they can be used for dispersing the chemotherapy drug into the tumor. So there are different models and there are different technologies which have been established with these micro robotic structures so that it can reach, it can cater the targeted drug delivery based systems. Then there are some heat based therapies, basically kind of a magnetic hypertherapy, which are mainly focused towards targeted and cancerous cell while leaving a healthy tissues unharmed. So these are some of the examples where it can be deployed for kind of a cancer treatment. Then we have the gene therapy and the regenerative medicines. So some designs enable the cell delivery for a regenerative medicine. So it is used to inject stem cell into the damaged tissue to promote a kind of a healing. So these are some of the designs like which are being established. Now when we discuss the challenges in these medical micro robots, like one of the key challenges which are involved is the miniaturization and the limitation. So like creating a tiny yet powerful motor, actuator and power source is a challenging task. Like of course, in most of the cases it is well established through some micro and nano fabrication technique, but still when we try to probe into the complexity of it, it has its own limitations. Next is with reference to balancing size, weight and functionality our characteristics remain difficult. Next, with reference to navigation and control, precision in navigation inside a dynamic and a fluid filled human body is highly difficult. Most important point with reference to this, with the recent development in AI related domain, there requires AI driven autonomous movement and the external guidance system will be capable enough for appropriate navigation and control. Now, when we try to talk about the biocompatibility of the safety concerns, material must be biocompatible and avoid immune rejection. And most important, the robot must avoid tissue damage and be safely removed or degraded after the use. So these are some of the concerns which we may need to take it up into confidence with reference to biocapability and safety concerns. With reference to power and energy limitation perspective point of view, so most of the micro robots, the power management plays a vital role with reference to micro robotic perspective point of view, especially in medical applications. So most of the micro robots cannot carry a large batteries. It limits the operational time, and the solution includes a kind of a wireless energy transfer and a biopowered system are considered to be some of the key limitations. Now to give you a kind of a summary, like we have been discussing about the biomimicking based structures. Basically in the last module we had discussed about some of the key like mechanisms which are involved in biomimicking. Here we have taken those biological inspiration locomotion mechanism and we have deployed these for different applications. So one of the application which we have discussed is this gecko inspired climbing robots. We have discussed in detail about the different types of mechanism involved, what all the different models are involved for designing a gecko as a climbing robot. So we have also discussed about the different types of adhesion which has been established in this gecko kind of robot in detail, and then we have also discussed about the applications and the challenges involved. Then one of the practically used micro robot is the magnetic swimming micro robot. So we have discussed about the parameters involved, about the different propulsion mechanism which exhibits with reference to this microorganism, especially for magnetic micro devices. So we have discussed about the overall working principle and the applications and the challenges involved in it. So we also had a detailed discussion about the acoustic actuated based micro robots and about the types of acoustic actuated based micro robots, the different challenges which are involved and how it has been used for microfluidic and microsurgery related applications. So one of the specialized adhesive technique is this bio-inspired fibrillar based adhesive. So we have discussed about the overall configuration of this bio-inspired fibrillar based adhesive, how does it looks like, how it can be implemented, what are the different functions which are there with reference to this bio-inspired structures. And then we had a detailed discussion about this lizard inspired water runner robot. In fact, our earlier background helped us to understand the mechanism of this lizard inspired water runner robot. So we took the basilic lizard as our case study. So we had discussed in detail about the different locomotions which are deployed and what are the key components which are being catering these lizard inspired water runners, what are the different actuation and the locomotion mechanisms which are being deployed, and what are the key components and the locomotion mechanism which exhibits over here. So we also had a discussion about the different challenges which are exhibited with these water runners. We had a discussion about water striders, the different configuration of water striders, the principles involved in water strider mechanism, what are the key component of this water walker robot, and then some of the locomotion mechanism which are being deployed and application of this water walker and the challenges deployed. Then one of the specific case study what we have discussed is a medical micro robot for endoscopy application. So we have taken two different mechanisms. One is a peristaltic based mechanism and another one is a PZD actuator based mechanism, and then the types of medical micro robots which are being effectively used for different application, what are the key components and working mechanisms which are employed, application of these medical micro robots, and then we also had some discussion about this like different applications and the different micro robots which are being deployed. Now, to give you, so we also had a discussion about the challenges in the medical micro robot in terms of a summary. So we are at the end of this micro robotics course. So ideally, I want to summarize some of the key aspects so that people can take up this as their research career. So some of the key challenges which are involved with reference to these micro robots are concerned. One is the energy harvesting. So these energy management of these micro robots is highly challenging, which needs to be addressed and which needs to be looked into it. Second is the kind of a multi-robot SWAN coordination, where a group of water workers and robots could collaborate for large-scale monitoring. Third is with reference to advanced autonomy with AI. So the robots could adapt the dynamic environment using a machine learning. So it requires quite a good amount of study and quite a good amount of data to generate such kind of AI based model so that it can be effectively implemented. Next is about the hybrid aerial water robot. Even though there are several hybrid aerial water robots are demonstrated, however, there are more requirement with reference to strategic areas perspective point of view. So which can be explored in detail. These are some of the references. Thank you very much.